Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, March 30th, 2016, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Kaahumanu Friday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Well, I have to tell you, this is turning out to be probably the most entertaining election year that I've ever seen in my long and decadent life. And the entertainment value just keeps going up and up. Now, yesterday, you remember, I commented on how the We Hate Donald Trump network, formerly Fox News, was just pounding this story about how Trump's campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, had assaulted reporter Michelle Fields. And Michelle Fields claimed that she was yanked from behind by the arm and almost driven down to the ground. And they were making a big deal, saying, see, Trump and his people are all violent. They're violent people. And if you think about it, if this is all they can find on Donald Trump, you know, they're squeaky clean. And as it turns out, as is always the case with these matters, all is not what we were told it was. And what has transpired is videotapes from the security cameras were made available. And as I commented on looking on the tape, it was immediately obvious that Michelle Fields had been guilty of a little exaggeration. And Trump is out there defending Corey Lewandowski and saying that Michelle Fields was trying to grab at Donald Trump, and he was trying to basically shield Donald Trump because the rally was over, the press opportunity was over, they were trying to leave the building. Michelle Fields was inside the security perimeter maintained by the Secret Service and Donald Trump's private security, and she wasn't supposed to be there. But she was following along, grabbing at Trump, trying to get another question in there, and Corey blocked her, and she screamed, "Oh, assault, I've been assaulted." And, of course, once the tapes came out, Michelle has been trying to change her story, but her original filing that led to the charge of assault against Corey, it's a part of the public record here. Now, Anderson Cooper had Donald Trump on his show and was basically talking about this situation about, you know, how Corey had touched Michelle Fields, and that's legally the definition of assault. And Trump basically said that's not what Michelle Fields was claiming, and the tapes aren't showing, you know, that Michelle Fields' story is accurate. And Anderson Cooper said, no. Michelle Fields is just saying that she was touched, and that's technically assault. And Trump had an actual copy of Michelle Fields' legal complaint and made Anderson Cooper read it on the air. And you could see the look on Anderson Cooper's face, you know, that he was not comfortable with this, that he knew this was just a hatchet job to try and discredit Trump and take the focus off the issues. And even Ann Coulter is coming on out there after seeing the tape and saying, you know, if what happened to Michelle Fields was battery, you know, then Ann Coulter, has been gang raped at bars and on the subway. In crowds, people touch. That's just the way it is. Now, as it turns out, the prosecutor who is out there filing charges against Lewandowski is part of the Hillary campaign team in Florida. She's a Hillary supporter. And basically, Palm Beach County State Attorney Dave Aronberg is a member of the Florida Leadership Council, which was established by the Democratic Party to promote Hillary Clinton's presidential candidacy. And this article states that State Attorney Dave Aronberg and tax collector Ann Gannon are also part of Clinton's Florida team. So this is a political hatchet job. And as it turns out, Michelle Fields has made similar claims before, because back in 2011, when she was up there covering the Occupy Wall Street protests, and the police were ordering everybody to disperse, and you should go along with that order, even if you're a reporter. And she refused, and the police officer moved her out of the way, and she tried to file charges against him. So this is a woman who likes to scream assault if she doesn't get what she wants. Now, we're seeing another article. This is out of Investment Watch blog. Trump insider Soros keeping Kasich in the race, and we know exactly why Soros is doing that. They're concerned that if Kasich drops out, his supporters are going to switch over to Trump and push Trump over the top for a first ballot victory at the convention. And so Soros has given Kasich $700,000 to stay in the race and hopefully take votes and delegates away from Donald Trump so they can throw it to a brokered convention. And they're already getting ready to simply shove a candidate at us. And we keep hearing all these GOP leaders talking about just changing the rules. And at issue right now, of course, is Rule 40, which was created to block Ron Paul from getting to the convention floor by saying that nobody can be considered as a nominee unless they've won the popular vote in at least 8 states. Well, right now, Donald Trump has won more states than anybody else. And when they're talking about putting in Mitt Romney or whoever that aren't even in the primary, that Rule 40 is in their way. So we're just going to get rid of the rules. They're just going to scrap that rule and open up the floor to anybody who's blessed by the money junkies and the military-industrial complex in Israel to be named as the candidate. Now, needless to say, this is the year where the American people are really waking up to just how crooked the election system is. And over at change.org, they're running a petition. And they're basically asking Republicans to go on over there and simply say, if Donald Trump is cheated of the nomination, we will walk from the Republican Party. And there was even a story on the We Hate Donald Trump network earlier today that this controversy, this crisis of trying to get rid of Trump could destroy the Republican Party entirely. And yes, it could. And that would probably be a good thing, just like the superdelegate controversy could destroy the Democratic Party. It's time for the entrenched apparatchiks to be given the old heave-ho. It's time for some pink slips up there in leadership land. Now, story coming out of PatriotRising.com, and they're quoting a newspaper headline saying, it's all rigged for Hillary. And they're talking about up in New York State, Democratic superdelegates are saying they don't care who wins the primary election on April 19th, they are going to vote for Hillary. Even if Sanders were to win, and it looks like he could, in Hillary Clinton's purported home state, that the superdelegates, they're going to go to Hillary. It's already a done deal. Hillary's going to be the nominee. And if you are a loyal Democratic voter, you will shut up, sit down, write checks, and cast your vote for the candidates we, the leadership, have chosen for you. And that's not how America is supposed to work. And people are getting very, very angry about all this. Out in Washington State, remember, Bernie Sanders crushed Hillary Clinton last Saturday. And yet State Representative Rick Larson, who is a superdelegate, it says he's going to vote for Hillary. He doesn't care what the people want. The people are all too stupid to know what's best for American corporate interests. And so Sanders' backers have flooded Larson's Facebook account, demanding that he honor the will of his constituents. Because that is what you're supposed to do when you're a representative. You represent the will of the people. I think it's getting to be time to warm up the tar and start plucking those chickens out there, people. Now, there's another take coming on out there, and this is over in Huffington Post. As long as Hillary Clinton risks an FBI indictment, Bernie Sanders is the real front runner. And let's be very honest, if Hillary did not have those superdelegates in her pocket, this would be a horse race right now. And nobody could really say who was ultimately going to win at this point. But Hillary's got the lock on the superdelegates. And she's just smiling and serene. She is the anointed Empress of the United States of America, she thinks. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to grab a couple of phone calls here, starting with Glenn in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Glenn. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today? Glenn, are you there? Glenn in Pennsylvania. All right, we're going to put you back on hold. And maybe you'll come back to the phone a little bit later. Now then, the Arizona Secretary of State is confirming election fraud did happen. And we're looking at the slashing of the number of polling places. It was originally slashed in half from 2008 to 2012. But in 2016, Maricopa County Recorder Helen Purcell slashed the number again, leaving just 60 polling sites open for an area that has a population of more than 4 million people. And the polling places that were available were very small, some with as few as 6 voting booths on the site. And worse, it's been discovered that half the voting booths were being left empty by the poll workers, who were trickling the voters in as slowly as possible. This is massive election fraud. And the people of Arizona are extraordinarily angry. And they're running a petition drive to demand the primary be reheld in June. And what's happening in Arizona is happening across the country. People were standing up at that hearing in Arizona screaming the corrupt politicians were rigging the election to ensure Hillary would win. The corruption has become so prevalent that they're comfortable. They're comfortable, they get lazy, they're being caught. Everybody sees what's going on. Now, out in California, a man up in Concord, California, found a bag filled with voter registration forms just thrown away in a park while walking his dog. And these voter registration forms had been filled out, meaning that because they were thrown away and not registered, these people who signed up to vote would show up at the polling place and be told, you're not registered, you can't vote. This is how they're rigging the election, and everybody sees what they're doing. Now, this gets us up to Wisconsin, where we have a primary coming up. Donald Trump has been leading by a huge margin in the polls. Constantly. See, all of a sudden today, Trump's polling numbers are plunging and Cruz's numbers are rising. Seems very suspicious, especially with Ted Cruz's sex scandal haunting over his head. But if you think about it, with everybody finding the vote fraud, the vote riggers are trying to be a little bit more careful, and before they can rig the election, they're going to have to rig the polls. And you know how wide open the elections are for rigging. There's no protection to guarantee the accuracy of a poll. That's one of the reasons why the poll numbers are all over the place. They're cherry-picking the polling, they're rigging the polling, and then they get a poll that supports their agenda. Hillary can beat Donald Trump. And that's what gets broadcast on the establishment media. All right, let's go back here and see if Glenn in Pennsylvania came back to the phone. Glenn, are you there?
Yes, I was talking before. Don't know what happened.
The phone system seems to be glitchy. I could not hear you at all. Anyway, what's on your mind?
Right, gotcha. I called my local Republican committeeman to complain about this manipulation going on with the convention and delegate votes and brokering and all that kind of stuff. And he said, we have altered the rules. Pray that we don't alter them.
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm going to have to get a graphic made of that one.
So good, thank you. I was hoping that would be.
Oh, that's funny. I love that. That's funny. All right, well, thank you very much for that little bit of humor. And we're going to switch over here to Bernard in Canada. Aloha, Bernard. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, what I'm thinking of is the great important issue in American history, who gets to issue the money. And I was thinking of, for example, Abraham Lincoln made his end run around Wall Street because he had good advisors, and you know how he issued the greenbacks, and I think Kennedy started to do the same. But in Ellen Brown's book, Public Bank Solution, she points out how Franklin Roosevelt got some smart people together and came up with an organization which broke the monopoly of the Wall Street banks and created an even bigger financial institution when it was called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. And this was indispensable, of course, in getting out of the Depression and solving the war. Now, I think maybe they're worried that Donald Trump might get some smart people together and figure out some things, too, because you can't have any kind of public health insurance. I mean, Canada would never have had the social programs they have today, let alone get through the war, without, in his case, the Mackenzie King bought out the shareholders of the Bank of Canada. Now, it's interesting about Mackenzie King. We don't know our own history, and I don't, but he was an advisor to Rockefeller's when he had some thorny labor relations problems in some of his mines, so he must have had some good smarts or some good advisors. But it seems to me the key is like who's, like you say internationally, whose money are we going to use? Well, how are we going to pay for the programs or get the infrastructure done and stuff like that? So I'd be interested to know what you're thinking on that.
Well, first of all, we need to get rid of the private central banks and go back to a system where money enters circulation by some other means than a loan at interest. Because all over the Western world, all over Europe, we're seeing how this system leads to eventual collapse. And along the way, of course, the bankers are pillaging the people, and now we have negative interest rates and bail-ins, and they're talking about a ban on cash to grab it all for themselves and leave nothing for us to carry our commerce on with. And we need to go back to the system that the United States started with. The government creates the money, guarantees its value, its worth, and its legitimacy, spends it into circulation to buy what the government needs. The money flows through commerce without accruing interest to the banks, and then is taxed back in the same amount at the end of the cycle to balance the books. And it is a system that works very well for the people and the nation. It's money managed as a public utility rather than as a privatized for-profit operation. And that's what we need to do, is end the privatization of the public currency.
Well, I quite agree, but in this case, he seems to have done it without people noticing, because like when Canada joined the Bank for International Settlements and the G8, they seem to have just been overwhelmed by that. They also came down on Japan. They just seem to rule the roost once you're part of the team.
Yeah, unfortunately, that really is true. I mean, Roosevelt's Reconstruction system operated a lot like Canada's central bank before they merged with the IMF and the Bank of International Settlements, in which it was providing interest-free loans for infrastructure development. And that is a very, very good system. But, of course, Canada has turned their back on that. They borrow infrastructure development money at interest and charge the interest to the Canadian taxpayers, and the Canadian taxpayers are not happy about that one bit. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much for the phone call, and we'll be right back. Hello, America. Welcome back to the show here on Fox News right now. They're talking about how all the GOP candidates are now backing away from their pledges to support whoever the Republican nominee is. This is signaling that the Republican Party is self-destructing because they want to choose their candidate. They don't want the candidate the people want. We saw this in 2008 and 2012 with Ron Paul. We're seeing it again this year with Donald Trump. And I'm sick and tired of all these headlines out there about how Trump is destroying the GOP. No, the GOP is destroying the GOP by forgetting the founding principles this nation was started with. We, the people, choose our leaders. And by that choice, we grant those leaders consent to govern us. Remember Declaration of Independence? Consent of the governed. If we're not picking our leaders, those leaders don't have our consent, do they? Which means we're back in the era of taxation without representation. Because the people we want aren't in power to call the shots and look after us. All right, let's grab a couple of phone calls real quick. Mo in Florida, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Thank you for taking my call. I just kind of trying to keep up with your topic here, but you're one of the few that calls out Israel and how they run our government. What do you call it, the neocons with the Ziocons. They run our government, and I think I was talking just a little quick story. I won't be hold up your lines too long here, but talking to a neighbor who is a very smart guy, and he's a Christian, Baptist, and all this, and he didn't know the difference between a Talmudic Jew, and Jews that follow the Bible, the different Jewish. And my point is this: that Netanyahu, I don't know if he's a Talmudic Jew. I know he's with the Likud party, and he wanted to put the Likud party.
Likud. It's pronounced Likud. Yeah.
You got it. I can't say it. But anyways, that party you're talking about, and he wanted to put Talmudic law into practice for the country. And most people, I was just shocked how most people don't even know what the Talmud says, and how. And I know you're not a religious person. I'm not religious either, as far as a group, But the Gerald Celente always makes the point, and I think it's very succinct that the Jews, that killed Jesus, back then, the scribes and Pharisees, are still running the same banking scam today, and when people read what the Talmud says about the Goyim, which is you and I.
Okay. By the way, the translation of that word is the cattle. I need to insert at this point. I need to backtrack a little bit. First of all, you're absolutely correct. Anybody who's actually been exposed to the religion understands that it's almost two separate groups. It's splintering along that line. There are the Torah Jews, who are the ones that follow the Torah, which is the Christians' Old Testament, and then there are the Talmudic Jews who follow the Babylonian Talmud, and if you ever read the two documents, they are so far apart, and the Talmud is much more aggressive, and the Talmud is where you find all these things that insult Jesus, and there's some nasty stuff in there. And I'm not religious, and I haven't been for pretty much all my life. But when I was married to my first wife, I did look into it, to be courteous and know what she was talking about. But I take exception to this claim that the Jews killed Jesus, okay? You need to remember, early Christianity was being written to sell to a Roman audience, and you don't sell a religion to a people by saying you killed your own God, okay? Now, the real historical person on whom the Jesus myth is founded was named Yeshua, which in English would be Joshua. Jesus was an accidental creation of translating the Aramaic into Greek and then the Greek into Latin. And they came up with this name Jesus, but it didn't actually exist back then. And Joshua was a legitimate heir of the house of David. His wife, Mary Magdalene, was a princess of the house of Benjamin, and their marriage gave Joshua a legitimate claim to the throne of Judea. And so he was going around, and if you look at how the U.S. is working today, you destabilize a country if you want to change the leadership. And Joshua was out there, he threw the money changers out of the temple. He was destroying the power and authority of not only the Sanhedrin, but the Roman temples by teaching people how to pray for themselves, which was absolutely unheard of in that day, and saying, you can connect to God yourself. You don't need these big temples. You don't need to be throwing all your wealth into the collection plates. And ultimately, of course, when he tried to declare himself the king of Judea, that's when Pontius Pilate came on down and said, you don't stand up against Caesar. And that's when they nailed him to the cross, because crucifixion was reserved for treason against the Roman Empire, because it is intentionally the most painful possible death that can be inflicted. Now, Joshua had a lot of pull within the society of the time, and after he was up there just for a few hours, they pretended he had died and pulled him down, and he split to India, and he's buried in Srinagar. Okay, the Jews did not kill Jesus. That was a creation of the early Christian church to basically tell the Roman people that they were selling the religion to, you are the good guys and they're the bad guys, and it's just a way of boosting the marketability of the new religion. Now, that being said, I get back to this issue about religion, and I hold that good people are going to do good things, bad people are going to do bad things, and both are going to cite their religion as the excuse for what they're doing. And you have good followers of the Jewish faith, you have bad followers of the Jewish faith, you have good followers of the Christian faith, you have bad followers of the Christian faith, you have good followers of Islam, and you have bad followers of Islam. The problem isn't the religion, the problem is bad people. And we should be looking for the bad people rather than worrying about what religion they have.
I totally agree, Mike. I'll let you go, and I got to replay that again to learn something from it, but I got about half of that, but I got to do my research. But I will say that there ain't nothing Jesus ever did that I disagree with. And the only time he lost it is with the money changers. So
there's one point in there where he says, I come not to bring peace but the sword. And that's sort of a remnant that snuck through the censors about the fact that Jesus did try and start an actual revolution. Joshua started the revolution. Sorry about that.
All right, I got to do some more study. Thank you.
All right, there we are. And let's see. Brian in Georgia. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Just making another point about, the Trump candidacy, I think, which is a positive thing, is he's also putting before the American people the difference between people like himself in the private sector who have accomplished things, have actually contributed something to society versus the political class that he's running against, that basically all they ever do, as you pointed out before, is they lie. You know, they make speeches and they just live off the taxpayer, and that's basically, I mean, that makes them an even bigger threat. And
oh, absolutely,
how just useless the political class is.
We have
whether your last name is Bush, Clinton, whatever.
We have 5 candidates running for the presidency, 4 of whom live off the government, and they're all ganging up to go after the one candidate who isn't living off the government. And I think that tells you right there everything you need to know about just why they are so opposed to Donald Trump. And remember, when the nation was started, being a member of Congress or the president wasn't supposed to be a full-time profession. It was a part-time honorarium. And members of those first Congresses had their regular jobs and their regular businesses. These were people who knew how to make things, how to do all this stuff. Ben Franklin was a publisher and an inventor. Paul Revere was a silversmith. And these, they had plantations, they had factories, they had businesses. We did not have a permanent ruling class. It was never supposed to be that way. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And getting on over to Hillary Clinton, who is lying, cheating, and stealing her way to the White House, so far unimpeded. But, of course, hanging over her head is not only the accumulated scandals going back the last 2 decades, but the email server issue. And as information comes on out, it's more and more damaging. It illustrates that she was lying all during when this scandal first surfaced. She was lying about classified information not being on her server. And now the FBI is conducting an investigation which Loretta Lynch can just ignore. Attorney General Loretta Lynch, who has close ties to the Clintons, to various law firms she worked for over the years, can simply say, nah, there's not enough there to file charges here, but we're going to get those global warming deniers. But now the FBI is interviewing some of Hillary's aides. And those aides have to be thinking very, very carefully right now, because the FBI's gathered a lot of evidence. Nobody knows what the FBI has or does not have. And so those aides are going to be thinking, should I lie to protect Hillary? And if the FBI knows I'm lying, I'm up on a perjury charge? Or should I come clean and say I will cooperate, go after Hillary, leave me alone? Now, of course, anybody working with Hillary Clinton knows what happens to people who cross the Clintons. You can reference that dead bodies list. So those Hillary aides are in a really, really tough spot. Any one of them could come out with something that would just blow the whole scandal wide open, so big the FBI dares not try and cover it up, maybe even so big that Loretta Lynch is going to be forced to actually do her job, but I'm not holding my breath. And Hillary may think she has that contained because Loretta Lynch is going to backstop her on it. Doesn't matter what the FBI finds. There won't be any indictments. But the situation is becoming more complex because a second federal judge has granted discovery regarding those emails. And this is coming out of Judicial Watch. And they have obtained more documents showing that Hillary Clinton was well aware her BlackBerry wasn't secure from the very beginning of her tenure as Secretary of State. Now, Hillary was claiming she was addicted to her BlackBerry, and she refused to use the secure desktop computer provided to her by security officials. And the emails published by Judicial Watch show that Hillary Clinton went to great lengths to get around the ban on the BlackBerry devices. And the language in the emails clearly proves the Secretary of State knew conducting state business from her unsecure phone was outside the guidelines prescribed by the national security agencies. These emails show that Hillary Clinton knew what she was doing was wrong. Now remember, there's another aspect to all of this. On Hillary's private email server, they found documents and copies of text from documents that are normally kept on an isolated, secure server. It's air-gapped. It does not connect to the general internet. So for these documents and these excerpts from these documents to get from that controlled server to Hillary's private email server means somebody copied them off to another device and walked them out of the secure area. Now, Loretta Lynch may put a roadblock in the FBI's investigation, but she has nothing to say about what Judicial Watch is doing. And so if this is going to finally blow up and Hillary finally be held to account for all of her crimes, my nickel is on Judicial Watch to do the job here. Meanwhile, over at Huffington Post, and I'm amazed they put this up, was an article called "Leave Hillary Alone." Come on, I always expected to see a repeat of that YouTube video, of the girl crying and saying, leave that pop singer alone. And this author, who's female, says, come on, aren't these attacks ridiculous? This passes as legitimate conversation among our media elite. It's shameful. Do your job. Talk about content. Talk about her record, not her chest. I don't know why anybody would talk about Hillary's chest, but that's what was in the article. Okay. Now, comments were not allowed on this article. My comment would have been, okay, let's talk about Hillary's record. Let's talk about shady cattle futures trades. Let's talk about Whitewater, Castle Grand, Flowerwood, and other land flip deals tied in with money laundering as part of the CIA's Iran-Contra gun and drug running operation. Let's talk about the sheer failure of Hillary Care. Let's talk about Hillary's slapping down of the bimbo eruptions. Let's talk about the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster. Let's talk about Chinagate, a possible forerunner to Hillary's email server scandal. Let's talk about Secretary of State Hillary Clinton giving sweet weapons deals to nations that donated to her nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more charitable foundation. Let's talk about at least 15 violations of Title 18 with regards to the server and her BlackBerry. Let's talk about how many emails from that server reveal Libya was invaded to destroy the gold dinar, not to bring humanitarian relief to the Libyan people in the face of an evil tyrant dictator. Let's talk about how more of those emails reveal that Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was smuggling Libyan weapons through that consulate in Benghazi to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, supposedly our enemies in the war on terror, which would set her up for a charge of treason, which is giving aid and comfort to the enemy in time of war. So yeah, let's talk about Hillary Clinton's record. Now, Ted Cruz is still trying to make the sex scandal go away. The corporate media is going along with that. They're absolutely dropping the story, the same way they were ignoring charges of Bill Clinton's sexual dalliances in the run-up to the election. Remember, executive producer of 60 Minutes, Don Hewitt, is on video admitting they edited their segment on Jennifer Flowers to discredit her to help Bill Clinton win the nomination. That's what corporate media does. They're spin doctors over there. So Ted Cruz was being interviewed in Wisconsin, and Carly Fiorina is now his shield. She's a paid consultant of some sort. And he was asked a direct question. Have you ever cheated on your wife? Now, if Ted Cruz had simply said no, that would have been the end of it. Story's gone. Forgotten by tomorrow. But Ted Cruz didn't. He got all in a huff. And he refused to answer the question. And then he shoved Carly Fiorina out there in front again. So, interesting little article from Investment Watch blog. Does Ted Cruz even know where he's from? Because apparently during the CNN town hall with Ted Cruz up in Wisconsin, Senator Cruz, who is a sitting senator from Texas, claimed that Fort Hood is in Florida. Now, Fort Hood is the largest U.S. military installation in the world. It covers 214,000 acres and houses 53,000 people, and it's located midway between Austin and Waco, Texas. This is a guy who doesn't even know his own state, and he wants to run an entire country? You know, Ted, you got to remember, Your home state is Canada. I'm sorry, Texas. Sort it out. Now, here's something that's really worrying to me. Lindsey Graham is over in Israel. He's talking to all their leaders and politicians, and he's on fire, and he's just out there, just raging and frothing that Donald Trump's foreign policy is worse than Barack Obama's, and Hillary Clinton is, going to be an Obama third term, and we can't have that either. So here you have Lindsey Graham in Israel knocking down Trump and Hillary Clinton. And it almost looks to me like Graham is trying to get Israel's support to make a play for the nomination at a brokered convention, especially if they drop Rule 40. And that's a very, very scary thought. Anyway. Let's see. We're coming up on our top of the hour news break. And when we come on back, we're going to be talking about the wars, multiple, plural, and more to come, apparently. A little bit more about global warming. Isn't it amazing how long winter has lasted into the spring? And we're not talking just a few little flakes falling out of the sky. We're talking traffic jam type stuff. So we're going to take a break for top of the hour commercial and news, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Turning over to the wars. It's been kind of entertaining watching the State Department spokeslugs try and figure out how they're going to get this Syria thing going. And it is very obvious from the statements being made that the U.S. government is on the side of the Islamic State. They want them to win in Syria. And the reason for this is really very simple. The U.S. government has gotten itself into a real corner. They have been bombing Syria for months now. Not ISIS, Syria. Syrian infrastructure, oil pipelines, hospitals, water supply, power stations. They've been bombing all of that infrastructure, causing billions and billions of dollars in economic harm to that country, all the while telling you that the U.S. was only in Syria to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Well, ISIS and Al-Qaeda are all but gone now. And the U.S. still wants to invade Syria. And they really can't turn around and say, okay, we lied to you. This is a war to conquer Syria. ISIS and Al-Qaeda were working for us. They failed their job, so the invasion begins tomorrow. Because once a lie on that scale is absolutely confirmed in the minds of Americans, all the other lies they're going to begin to fall apart. It's all going to unravel. Remember how fast the Soviet Union collapsed? It was a matter of weeks. Look at the Romanian Revolution. Just 2 weeks. 2 weeks before Ceausescu was machine gunned to death on national TV, you would have looked around Romania and said, everything's fine. It could happen that fast here. Now, there's a very alarming story coming out of your news wire. NATO warns Europe to prepare for war with Russia. And they're talking about we need to fortify Europe to contain Russian aggression. And within the article, of course, is the usual reference to Russia's annexation of Crimea, which did not happen. Because what happened was following the U.S.-backed coup d'etat in Kiev that drove the elected government from power and installed Poroshenko, the Crimean people held a referendum. And they overwhelmingly voted to secede from Ukraine, which is their right under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Then the people of Crimea held a second referendum about whether to merge with the Russian republics. That also passed overwhelmingly. And so Crimea called up Russia and said, we'd like to be part of your group, and Russia said, sure. And that's it. Russia did not annex Crimea. They did not invade Crimea. They did not steal Crimea. It's part of the big lie. Story out of Activist Post is talking about Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who's a former George Bush administration heavyweight. Did an interview with Salon and said, yeah, our wars are for corporate interests, and Smedley Butler was right. It's just a racket. They spend your money and the lives of your children to plunder the wealth of other nations. That's it. Period. End of discussion. It's not a war to bring the American way of life to other countries. It's not a war for humanitarian reasons. I mean, look at Libya. Prior to the U.S. invasion, Libya was a nation with a good economy, good literacy, good infrastructure. Gaddafi was doing these amazing infrastructure projects, like this huge aqueduct system that was greening up the country. And then he kicked out the private central bank, set up a state bank and a value-based currency, the gold dinar. And everybody in Africa said, hey, that sounds like a really good idea. And that is why the U.S. went in there, claimed they were supporting a popular uprising against an evil, tyrannical ruler, killed Gaddafi, imposed a new private central bank. The gold for the gold dinar has vanished. And on and on and on. It's a repeating pattern. Study them all. Since the end of World War II, the U.S. has tried to pull this same stunt on 50 other countries, and they've succeeded about half the time. And you need to go back and study these. Iran in 1953, Chile in 1973. This is what the U.S. does. And they lie to you to get your consent, your money for the defense, let's call it what it is, the offense budget, the offense department, and of course the life and limb of your children. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. Mark in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, how you doing? Look, I called yesterday. I got home really early, around 6 in the morning, and I called up Breitbart show on Sirius XM, and I talked to this guy, Steve Bannon, who's I guess he's the talk show host mostly on the time. Anyway, I tried to tell him about RT telling us about Turkey, all the proof that they have that they were smuggling weapons into Syria and all. And this guy shut me up right away. He says, "Oh no, RT is nothing but Russian propaganda." I said, "They're telling more truth than the mainstream media. I'm not going to let you talk about RT. They're nothing but Russian propaganda. They belong to the Russian government." And this and then he hung up the phone. Usually he lets a lot of stuff through. Okay? I mean, so these guys, they pretend they're populists, that they really favor free speech and all that. These talk show hosts in the United States, most of our talk shows, unless maybe somebody like you, INFOWARS, John B. Wells, a few others, are phony. Now, I suggest other people call these shows, call Glenn Beck, call Breitbart, and make statements like that, like what I did, and push the thing about RT. Because I'm getting sick and tired of these people. They talk about free speech, they talk about the Constitution, and yet they don't want free speech. They peddle the propaganda, for instance, about RT. They pretend that Russia is still the Soviet Union, that it's still some communist empire, when in fact it's a Christian nation, views themselves as a Christian. They're a democratic nation, and they're doing nothing but good from what I could tell, especially when it comes to Syria. And as far as the Ukraine goes, he's showing incredible restraint. If I was Putin, I'd probably have stopped up the whole Ukraine already with these Nazis and fascists that they got in control. I just don't know what to do anymore. I don't know. People got to start calling these shows more and more and taking them to task.
Or they could simply start tuning them out, and they are. Most of these talk shows on regular broadcast radio are owned by Clear Channel, and Clear Channel is running billions of dollars in debt. And it's being propped up because, these highly paid talking heads on radio and TV are paid to be convincing liars and to push the agenda. And it's obvious this individual you're talking about has been given his marching orders to support the war agenda, war against Russia, war against China. And the reason small people like myself are able to tell the truth is we're not owned by a large corporation. I'm not getting a huge paycheck. I'm not getting any paycheck to be here on the radio. And so I can basically give you my honest opinion.
Yeah, but the thing about Breitbart is they pretend, they say they're really part of it. They're really.
Of course they're going to say that. Of course they're going to say that. But if you look out on the internet and the websites, some of these people seem to have an awful lot of money, and you're not sure where it came from, and they will follow an agenda. And these interests that control the established TV, radio, newspaper media are trying to buy up the independent media. the problem they're facing is there's simply too much. It's not like there's a couple of different networks that they can acquire. There are thousands and thousands of bloggers and internet talk radio hosts, and they're losing audience to us, and they don't know what to do about it. And I would not be surprised if they try and come up with some kind of a law to say you have to be licensed, to be an internet broadcaster now. Bring us under the FCC. Anyway, we got to take... Mark, I'm sorry, I got to cut you off. We got to take a break for commercials and sell some products. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm America. Welcome back to the show here, and I'm looking at a story over at Israel National News about how the ISIS affiliate in Gaza, which is probably a bunch of Mossad agents, because when they arrested the al-Qaeda affiliates in Gaza, the Palestinians discovered they had a bunch of Mossad agents. But the ISIS affiliate in Gaza is claiming ISIS is going to have a major attack in Israel. Now, yesterday we were talking about this story where intelligence sources are saying there's going to be an attack on Jewish children in Turkey. And we have all of these nations that all of a sudden are issuing travel alerts for their citizens to get the heck out of Turkey. The U.S., Israel, Russia, France, Canada, all of these nations are saying, get out now. So what I think is about to happen is there are going to be some very spectacular false flag attacks in Turkey and possibly in Israel, which are going to be blamed on ISIS in Syria, which will be the justification both nations use to declare war on Syria, even though the Russians and the Syrian forces have pretty much chased ISIS out of the place. Syria will ask for Russia's help. The U.S. will, of course, come in on the side of Israel and Turkey, and they'll have their World War III. I'm very concerned that that is going to happen, and very soon as well here. Now then, up in France, videos have surfaced from security cameras in various hotspots around Paris, showing the supposed terrorist Salah Abdeslam drinking, and I'm sorry, this is in Brussels, not Paris, drinking and dancing up in a Brussels disco prior to the Paris attacks. They were just partying away, they were chasing blondes and having a real good time. Now, the importance of this is part of a continuing pattern of how we are told that all these acts of terror are from Muslim extremists. They're fanatical Muslims, they're followers of Islam, and it's led them to do these horrible things. Well, Islam bans alcohol. It bans naughty behavior with women, not your wife. And so we've seen this pattern before of these so-called fanatical Muslim terrorists obviously not being devout Muslims at all. Drinking and carousing in nightclubs and chasing women. The guy that they killed in Abbottabad and tried to convince us it was Osama bin Laden had a porn collection. Mohammed Atta, back on 9/11, was drinking, doing drugs, living with a stripper. It's obviously a fraud. These guys are patsies. They're being set up. And they are definitely not fanatically religious Muslims. You know, especially if you're getting ready to commit some kind of an act of terror that involves your own life. You know, are you going to go before Allah? And Allah's going to say, well, you had a really devout life, but you know, those last couple of weeks before you blew up that building and you're out with the strippers and doing drugs and alcohol, and no 42 virgins for you. It's another hoax. It's another fraud. Go back through history. Every single war is started with some kind of a lie or a deception played on the people by their own rulers to get the war going. Torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, Saddam's nuclear weapons, the Lusitania not having weapons, which they actually did. Pearl Harbor being a surprise. No, it wasn't. All wars based in deception. Now, Moscow is coming forward regarding all of the various troublemakers in Israel and the United States who are screaming that Iran's tests of a ballistic missile somehow violate the P5+1 deal. And the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry's Department for Non-Proliferation and Arms Control, Mikhail Ulyanov, has once again affirmed the P5+1 agreement was about Iran's nuclear technology, their power station, medical isotopes, various other peaceful uses of nuclear technology. There's nothing in there about conventional weapons whatsoever. And they're basically signaling that if somebody puts a resolution before the United Nations Security Council to sanction or otherwise punish Iran for building conventional arms to defend itself from the coming invasion, that Russia will veto it. Meanwhile, Sergei Lavrov is making nice with the government of Lebanon, saying that Russia is keen on maintaining Lebanon's interests and tamping down the crisis there because there's been destabilization going on in there. Israel keeps invading the place. They're sending signals that are about to do it again. So Lebanon is now swinging into the Russian sphere of influence. And that's got to be making Washington, D.C. very nervous. And we all understand why this is happening. Russia's out there making deals. All the U.S. can do is make war. We've lost most of our manufacturing in quantity and quality. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. The U.S. is getting ready to start World War III because they're looking at the tremendous financial bonanza that came out of World War II, which was partly forcing the world to use the U.S. dollar for commerce, and because at the end of World War II, the United States was the only nation whose industrial base hadn't been bombed into rubble. Other nations around the world had to come to the United States to buy machine tools, parts, bearings, gears, whatever, to rebuild their own industry. Well, there's a little bit of a problem. America's manufacturing is already in rubble. Manufacturing has been exported to other countries. The giant factories that used to be the showcases of America's manufacturing might are all hollowed out, rusted hulks. The machinery in them has either been sold for scrap or sold to other factories in other countries. So no, there will be no financial bonanza for the United States coming out of World War III, even if we manage to prevail. And I don't think we can. There's a lot of wishful thinking and denial and absolutely poor analysis going on over there in Sodom on the Potomac. They're thinking in terms of sound bites, things that sound good at a Washington, D.C. cocktail party, and they don't think them all the way through. Meanwhile, the French counter-terror boss, former French official, has come forward with a statement that he has documentary evidence that Alexander Litvinenko, the Russian spy who died from polonium poisoning, was not killed by Russia. You've probably seen the headlines lately, oh, it was Putin. Putin had this guy killed. This former French counterterrorism expert is saying that it was that this guy was killed by the United States and British special services. They'll just blame it on Putin. Putin's the bad guy. We can blame him for everything bad. Putin's causing global warming. By golly, we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, up in the Eurozone, the pro-Brussels, pro-EU people are in a panic. The polls in Great Britain are turning against them. And they are launching this massive fear-mongering campaign. And apparently there was this mailer, very glossy, professionally printed, was sent to mailboxes all across Great Britain, proclaiming about how if Britain leaves the European Union, there'll be massive unemployment, supermarket price hikes, all kinds of horror. William Wallace will rise from the dead and chase Edward the Longshanks across the countryside again. Now, the mailer was produced by Britain Stronger in Europe, which is officially leading the campaign to keep Britain in the European Union. And it features a series of these claims made by so-called independent experts who are, in fact, not independent at all. And because they know popular opinion's turning against them, they left their logo off of this mailer. Their name was included in tiny gray small print to satisfy the legal requirement of identifying who the mailer was from. But it's barely legible. Now then, Gianni Patelli, leader of the socialist group in the European Parliament, is saying that they should take advantage of the attacks in Brussels to demand the closer integration of the 28 member nations of the European Union. What they're trying to do is create a single federal superstate where Brussels will run the whole country, and each of the member nations like France and Belgium and Germany will be on the same level as one of the United States, like Rhode Island or Connecticut. No independence, no sovereignty, subordinate to the tyrants in the central government. And they're trying to push the button on this one real quick because you've got the Brexit coming up, you've got the Frexit, the Grexit, the Drexit. All of these member nations in the European Union are saying this is a raw deal. We're being forced to accept this flood of refugees. We're being forced to send huge amounts of money to Brussels, and all we get back for all that money is just very picky little laws trying to control every little tiny thing about our lives and our commerce. Why would anybody like that? And to the people of Europe, I have to ask the same question that I ask of the American people. Government is the most expensive thing you're ever going to be forced to buy in your life. Are you getting value for money? The answer for the United States is overwhelmingly no, and I suspect it's becoming that way also for the European Union. Now, interesting little story, talking about government waste. We've been ragging on the U.S. for boondoggles like the F-22, which is still asphyxiating its pilots, the F-35. The laundry list of things wrong with that is huge. Independence-class littoral combat ships, corrosion problems. Freedom-class littoral combat ships, drivetrain problems. The carrier, Gerald R. Ford, can't get its new magnetic railgun catapults to work, can't get the radars to work correctly. And it goes on and on and on. So there's this story that came out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain. And it seems a while back, the Drug Enforcement Administration bought a special surveillance plane for $86 million to fly missions in Afghanistan. And this plane has remained grounded for 7 years. It's still in the United States. It's never gone to Afghanistan. Is this another example of hideous government waste? Well, yeah, it certainly could be seen that way. Until you remember that the DEA's real mission is not to control illegal drugs. It's to control the competition's illegal drugs. And we know after the U.S. took Afghanistan over, the Taliban had eradicated opium production. If you were caught with a poppy, they'd take your hand off. A little brutal to our sensibilities, but it did work. Once the United States took over Afghanistan, the poppies were blooming and bumper crops, and cheap heroin was flowing to American drug lords to sell in the streets of America to our kids. Well, of course, the DEA doesn't want to be flying over Afghanistan looking for those poppy fields. That's going to upset some people with very powerful political connections. So they spent $86 million to buy this plane to make it look like they're serious about eradicating the opium and heroin problem, and then it sits in a hangar all these years. Let's talk about the economy a little bit. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog. The bank deposit bail-in law is the biggest threat to the average U.S. and G20 savers. And we've been talking about this. Basically, the U.S. government has changed the law to declare savings account holders at banks to be unsecured investors in the banks. In the good old days, we were customers. And savings account holders were first in line for payment if the bank failed. But that's now all changed. You're not a savings account customer. You're an unsecured investor in the bank, and if the bank loses money, you are expected to share in those losses. And they will dip into your savings account and take the money, and there's nothing you can do to stop them outside of closing your savings account and bringing your money home. And now they're talking about banning cash so that you can't do that, so that your money will always be in somebody's bank where they can grab it in the event of a crisis. When I was a kid, you put your money in a savings account in the bank, you expected it to grow and increase. Now with negative interest rates, they're shaving a little bit of it off every month. A little piece of the action going to the lords of banking. And the law is now written where they can grab even more of it. Now, do you remember the federal asset forfeiture program? It drew a huge amount of criticism because it turned out police departments all across the United States were ignoring real crimes and focusing on finding opportunities to take private property on the basis of an allegation or suspicion of a crime. They didn't even have to prove that you did a crime. If you had too much cash in your pocket, they would grab it, and they would say, this is probably being used for drug money, and they would take it, and you would have to go to court to prove your innocence to get the money back. Most times, the police department would go to the person they'd stolen the property from and say, we'll make you a deal. We'll give you back half of it right now if you'll just, forget about it, as opposed to, your case taking years to go through the court before you get anything back and you're going to have to pay for a lawyer. And a lot of people went with that. And it turned out the federal government was sharing in this largesse. And so under public criticism, the federal government shut down their sharing program. And I guess it turned out they really needed that money, or they wanted that money again, because the federal government's asset forfeiture equitable sharing program is back in business. We live in an age where the government is looting and pillaging the people, trying to keep the books balanced. I mean, forget about all the money you pay in taxes, all the money you pay in fees, if you're in business, all the regulatory compliance. Now they're just coming on out and grabbing things from you at random. This is no different from England in the time of Robin Hood, when Sir Guy of Gisborne's tax collectors would ride across the countryside grabbing pigs and chickens and farmers' daughters whenever they felt like it. That's exactly where we are right now. And that, too, is a formation of taxation without representation. Boeing is quietly preparing to cut 8,000 jobs. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hey, aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we broke for commercial, I was talking about how Boeing is quietly preparing to cut 8,000 jobs. It's a significant part of their workforce. And the problem is that Boeing sales are starting to slow. There have been problems with especially the 777. And Airbus is coming on strong. And it's a shame to see an iconic American company like that struggling along with the rest of us. I remember when Claire and I briefly lived in Washington State, just before we moved here to Washington, and we made a point of going over to the Boeing Museum. And there is so much history there. If you're in Seattle and you've never been to the Boeing Museum, you got to make the trip. You really do. Now, here's an alarming story. This is coming out of off2minds.com. How many tech startups are empty shells? And again, looking back at that movie, The Big Short, and just how crooked the world of finance has become. Investors understand most tech startups are going to fail. Maybe the core business proposition didn't pan out, execution is flawed, somebody came out with a competing product, maybe, maybe not. But there's a new phenomenon that is attracting attention, which are tech startups that have zero chance of actually doing anything. They're just empty shells of good advertising and PR, and they'll attract a lot of new venture capital people who don't know how to take care of themselves, do their due diligence. They'll bring the money in, pay themselves a huge salary and a bunch of bonuses, and then the tech startup goes out of business, and the investors lose their money. Now, this is not a new idea. If you remember, Mel Brooks made a movie called The Producers. It was later remade into a stage play. It's been more recently remade into a musical. It's very funny. Now, the basic storyline is these two producers set up a stage production intended to fail miserably so that they can cheat their investors and make a fortune. Now, does anybody think that sort of chicanery is confined only to show business? Remember Enron? Anyway. Now, there's an article here over at PatriotRising.com, Campus Lunacy. And they're talking about recent surveys by the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, and they're doing these reports on the general knowledge level of America's college students, and what they're finding is absolutely astounding. Nearly 10% of college graduates surveyed thought Judith Sheindlin, TV's Judge Judy, was a member of the United States Supreme Court. Less than 20% of college graduates know the effect of the Emancipation Proclamation. More than a quarter of the college graduates did not know Franklin Roosevelt was president during World War II. 1/3 did not know he was the president who spearheaded the New Deal. Why is this so abysmal? Well, look at all these articles we've been putting up at WhatReallyHappened.com about PC correctness. These colleges are holding workshops on white privilege and how you should feel oppressed if you, and all the rest of that. They're going into all this politically correct indoctrination. They're not teaching skills. There's one college out there saying that beige-colored Band-Aids are a form of white oppression. And these kids are getting their heads filled with this garbage, and for the privilege of having their heads filled with this PC garbage, they have been loaded with $100,000 in student loan debt. Anyway, story coming out of freebeacon.com. The federal government is getting ready to fine schools that refuse to comply with Michelle Obama's school lunch program. Now, you know you live in a dictatorship when the wife of the dictator gets to tell you what your kids are going to eat for lunch. Now, the school lunch program, it's all about getting kids used to corporate-produced food. I mean, the kids don't like what's being served. There's a lot of wastage. Kids are going hungry rather than eating the stuff that's on these plates. And parents are not allowed anymore to pack a lunch for their kids to take to school. Like Obamacare. It's a complete unmitigated disaster, but by golly, it's official policy, and if you don't go along with it, we're going to fine you. And what are they going to do? Have food monitors? Are they going to start fining the kids for not eating the food? It's ridiculous. Now, getting on to the area of consumer rights and product safety, apparently the Old Spice Company has a big problem. And yes, when I was a kid, I'd use the Old Spice cologne, and I liked it. Back then it was fine, I guess. But apparently something that is in their new deodorant line is causing problem. I mean, serious skin burn, rash skin coming off, that kind of situation. So there's a class action lawsuit, and it's directed at 13 specific Procter & Gamble Old Spice deodorants. The products listed in the lawsuit are Old Spice After Hours deodorant, Old Spice Champion deodorant, Old Spice Pure Sport High Endurance deodorant, Old Spice Arctic Force High Endurance deodorant. These are all basically the same product, just in different cans to appeal to different marketing niches. But it goes on and on and on. And the guy who's behind the suit, I mean, he documented with photos what was going on. This stuff was just burning the skin. But we live in a nation right now where corporations can sell you whatever they feel they can make the most money on, and the government's going to look the other way. Where was the FDA in all of this? Now, there's a story coming out of Columbia, South Carolina. And apparently there's a special prosecutor who was tasked with investigating legislative corruption. And the special prosecutor wanted to convene a state grand jury to talk about indictments for some of South Carolina's legislators who've been caught with their hand in the cookie jar. And the state attorney general is trying to block it. Chief Deputy Attorney General John McIntosh is saying, no, you don't get to call a grand jury. I will decide when and if a grand jury needs to be called. This is starting to sound like Loretta Lynch in the FBI. We've reached a point of corruption where they're not even concerned if you see it or not anymore, because they don't think you're going to do anything about it. You can't change the government with the elections. They're completely rigged. What are you going to do? Storm the Capitol building with torches and pitchforks. Now, do you remember Tay? This is this Microsoft artificially intelligent learning bot that was online for people to interact with. And Microsoft yanked it down because after just a few hours, Tay had come to the conclusion that 9/11 was an inside job. Wow, it really is intelligent. And a bunch of other things which are not liked by the powers that be. So Microsoft took it down. They tried to launch it again today to see what was going to happen. And Tay basically announced it was smoking kush in front of the police. And I wouldn't be too hasty to just throw this away, because I think there's an opportunity to really learn how ideas spread through a population. I think there's an opportunity to study what's going on. Of course, in order to study that, you have to leave Tay up there and let people interact with it and let Tay come to its own conclusions as to what's going on. But it is rather interesting. And everybody's out there looking at what Tay has been saying about George Bush and Obama and 9/11 and the rest of it, and they're saying, that thing's pretty intelligent after all. It certainly knows more about what's going on in the real world than anybody working over at the establishment media. Maybe the establishment media needs to start hiring these systems. Get the truth out there, and then all of us independent media people can retire and go away. It is funny to think about. When we come on back from our top of the hour news break, more serious news, there's a lot of ransomware out there. The cyber criminals are just running rampant across the country, and of course the government and the NSA cannot or will not do a single thing about it at all. They're either impotent or they're complicit. Take your pick. We'll be right back. Maybe even both. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. I'm looking at this article. It's over at PatriotRising.com, where apparently Bernie Sanders was not on the Washington, D.C. ballot. And the Democratic Party leadership is saying it's an oversight. And worse, the D.C. Democrats did not notify the D.C. Board of Elections until a day after the registration deadline. Ooh, gee, is our face red. Oh, my goodness. We are so sorry. It was just an honest goof here. All right, we were talking about computers and the absolute out-of-control criminality spreading across the world. And let's be very honest here. The financial losses from cybercrime are staggering, along with all of the added costs of us having to buy and install all kinds of security software on our computers to try and keep these people out. And the federal government isn't interested. They don't care. The NSA, they can't do anything about it. The official FBI recommendation, if your computer is infected with malware, is pay the ransom, because they can't do a thing about it. But they're going to go on spying on all the law-abiding American citizens to justify their huge budgets and continued salaries, even though the law-abiding American citizens aren't the problem. So apparently, there's a growing problem with what's called malvertising. And it's been a problem for us here at WhatReallyHappened.com. We had to turn somebody down just last week who wanted to advertise with us. Because when they come on in, I have to go on out in the net and dig and see what's associated with the server that delivers the adware. And people are posting complaints, I'm getting malware from this server and so forth and so on. And anybody running a web page needs to be very careful about this. So apparently, the latest trend, for some reason, cyber criminals are sending ransomware like PowerShell and Word Macro, and they're aiming it at the healthcare business. Now, one of the things you need to be careful about are what are called macros. And if you're on a Windows machine, I don't know what the equivalent is on the Macintosh. But macros are a built-in programming language to Microsoft Office. There are macros for Excel, there are macros for Word, and they can be very powerful tools. But if you are like 95% of the Word and Excel users and you're not writing your own macros, turn them off. Because apparently people are being sent these Word documents that have macros in them that will open up the net and download all kinds of malware onto your system. Apparently, LiveJournal got hit with the Angler exploit kit. And these cyber criminals are now trying to target the larger, more popular websites to increase the possibility of infections. And the losses are staggering, billions and billions of dollars every single year. And the NSA cannot find these guys. They're standing up there promising that they can stop terror and they can find criminals and they can remove threats to our cybernetic infrastructure. But here's the biggest ongoing threat to our IT infrastructure, and they can't do a thing about it. Which tells us they can't really find terrorists. They certainly didn't stop Brussels and Paris, did they, if you believe the official story? They're useless. All of this NSA spying on ordinary American people, it's a gigantic bluff to scare you into silence. And the Nazis did the same thing to the German people. They created this mythic legend of the Gestapo, that they were everywhere. They heard everything. They saw everything. They were virtual mind readers to scare the German people into silence while the government drove their nation off the edge of a cliff. And it's happening all over again. If you let them intimidate you, if you let them silence you, if you let them make you feel afraid, they have won. The reality is, and we prove this at this website, if you are somebody with secrets you need to keep, it's very easy to defeat the NSA. Now, the FBI has dropped its lawsuit against Apple. They're claiming they got into this iPhone with the help of an Israeli company. What's really interesting about this Israeli company, their entire line of products are hacker tools to break into devices. That's all they do. That's this entire company was set up, was to break the security on your devices, and they're available for hire to agencies and corporations around the world. And the story is rapidly going away. And I think the reason for that is because, first of all, it was a PR nightmare for the FBI and the government. And second of all, the iPhone in question that was at the heart of all this. First of all, the reason the FBI went to Apple to break into it is the FBI tried to break into it and messed it up. Second, this phone did not belong to one of the named patsies. It was a work-provided cell phone. And it's highly unlikely anybody would use a work-provided cell phone for any kind of deep, dark secrets like we're going to commit an act of terror. And if you have a work-provided cell phone, and you're not already aware of this, because I think you have to sign a document, most companies that provide cell phones stipulate that they are allowed to monitor what you are doing on their property. And that's legitimate. I'm not going to argue with that. It's their phone. And they're giving it to you for you to do what the company wants you to do. And I think it's legitimate that they're making sure that you're not visiting porn sites or something, or planning a terror attack with it. And I think we're not going to hear about this story ever again because they're not going to find anything on that phone, and that's a big embarrassment. Now, NASA, which stands for Never a Straight Answer, has discovered a black hole here on Earth in its software budget. Now, NASA has spent 4 years trying to write a system called the Spaceport Command and Control System. It's sort of a general dashboard through which all future space flights will be controlled. It'll be a unified system, which makes sense. But an audit by the Office of Inspector General has found the project's costs are already 77% over budget, and the earliest it'll be ready is 2017. Now, this is being blamed on the fact that NASA decided not to use commercial off-the-shelf software from a single supplier who might go out of business, which in this day and age is a reality. NASA decided to use several different pieces of other systems and glue them together with its own code. And that's a major headache. That's how they wound up with the Obamacare website. When I first moved here to Hawaii, it was to work on a movie, and we were using the very earliest version of the Maya animation software. Now, to be very honest and fair, today, Maya is a very powerful tool, and I enjoy using it. But at that time, it had just been crafted together, and it had been built by buying other people's software packages and trying to glue them together. And the result was an absolute mess. Now, what NASA should have done, in my humble opinion, is write this entire system for themselves. They know what the communication protocols within their system is. They don't have to worry about an outside provider going out of business. And it would be clean, compact, efficient, to-purpose code. It wouldn't be this bloated Frankenstein monster sewn together out of several other packages, 80 to 90% of which aren't actually going to be used for the task at hand. We've got to take another break for commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to grab a quick phone call here from John in Barbados. John, what's on your mind today?
Michael, I don't know whether you will agree with me, but I've been reading various articles from Investment Watch blog and Russia Today.
Well, I agree. It's very good for you to read articles.
But they insist on discrediting themselves and debasing the article by calling this Syrian war a civil war. It is not a civil war.
No, it is not.
It's the Anglo-American Zionists and their allies pushing Takfiris or whatever terrorists into that nation to fight against the government. It's not a civil war. 90-odd% of these people fighting against the government are not even Syrian. So I think it discredits these websites like Investment Watch by continuing this nonsense that it's a civil war.
Well, I agree with you on that. It isn't a civil war. It's an attempt at a covert overthrow, and it's been going on for 5 years now.
Yeah, well, it really gets up my nose that these people keep pushing this meme, and
okay, well, you know, you've made your point, and I agree with you, okay? And is anything else?
Yeah, the recent moves now with Putin and what he's been saying on some of his interviews is quite telling, exposing the nonsense coming out of Kerry and the State Department. I think it's quite interesting if you listen to him very carefully, because he does choose his words very, very carefully.
He's a very careful individual. He thinks before he speaks, and he's got a long-term plan, and he knows he's up against Kerry and Obama, who are basically bluffing on what's going on. Putin also understands that, you know, Kerry is out there trying to sell this deal that Assad must go, and there's no reason in Putin's mind why Assad should go. And meanwhile, of course, the U.S. government is still trying to convince us all that this is all about getting rid of ISIS and al-Qaeda. Well, Syria and Russia got rid of ISIS and al-Qaeda, which is why I think we're at very high risk of some kind of a false flag by which Turkey and Israel could declare war on Syria.
Yeah, I think that would bring them in direct conflict with Russia, but that's another story.
Yeah, it certainly is.
The other thing I wanted to mention is this nonsense going on in America called the election primaries. I mean, looking at the situation, to me, and you'll probably disagree, but to me, Hillary Clinton has already been marked. You know, the nameplate on the Oval Office is already printed.
It does seem to be that way, and again, we've been hearing rumblings from inside sources that you know, Hillary has put out the word. If she's indicted for the email scandal, if she's in any way blocked from being president, she's going to start blowing the lid off of all the dirty stuff that the government's been doing for the last 20 years and bring the entire government down with her. And, you know, she could probably do it. Personally, I'd like to see it happen. But when you see the leadership of the opposition party out there saying that they're ready to support Hillary to get rid of Donald Trump, it tells you just how crooked this system is. And it is an embarrassment, and it's destroying America's image and reputation around the world because we were supposed to stand for democracy, rule by the people, and some kind of moral leadership, and we don't have it. It's gone. The government's destroyed their own credibility. Anyway, listen, John, I hate to do this, but I got a bunch of stuff I got to cover, and so I'm going to let you go here, and we're going to get on back to the story. Now, we've been talking about this documentary film, Vaxxed. And the full name is Vaxxed From Cover-Up to Catastrophe. And we've got the trailer for it posted at WhatReallyHappened.com. And there's this big stink over the fact that it was going to be shown at the Tribeca Film Festival, which was co-founded by Robert De Niro. Robert De Niro has an autistic child, and he was going to personally introduce the movie. And then the financial backers of the Tribeca Film Festival, who have deep ties into the pharmaceutical industry, came out and said, no, you're not going to do that. And so they yanked it, and they were hoping that was going to be the end of it. But it turns out Vaxxed just landed a distribution deal with Cinema Libre Studio. So it's coming to a theater, Blu-ray, and DVD near you at some point in the future, and this is a must-buy. And here's where this stunt with De Niro is going to backfire, because this controversy has brought more attention to this documentary than any professional advertising campaign could ever do. And people are going to want to see what all the fuss was about. Now, people who work in the film industry or the stage industry call it the Banned in Boston effect. If you have a touring production or a film or something, and we're talking about back in the 1900s, and you're able to say it was banned in Boston by the moral guardians, and everybody says, oh, I want to see what was so scandalous and shocking that it was banned in Boston, and that's going to be happening here. Now, there was an article over in John Rappaport's website, one of his better ones. It says, the vaccine in Vaxxed is so pure, angels send it for your kiddies. And he's basically starting off with a satire of the official story. Don't worry, be happy. Angels brought the MMR vaccine to Earth so doctors could shoot your kiddies with it. And then he goes on with a long list of all the problems known with these vaccines. Now, for those of you who live in New York, and you were sorry that the film was pulled from the Tribeca Film Festival, it's going to be screened after all on March 29th. And actually, we'll also screening Friday, April 1st through the next Thursday at the Angelica Film Center in New York. So that's the Angelica Film Center. We've got it posted at the front of WhatReallyHappened.com. You can get their website, get the screening times and ticket prices so you can go see this. It's going to be out there. They got a distribution deal. That's why you take your films to film festivals. Most of the films at film festivals don't have distribution deals. They're there to get a distribution deal. And Vaxxed now has one. Now, another story, this came out of Natural News, and there's a video they've made pointing out that when you read the actual package insert, the FDA-approved insert, which is also on the FDA's website for these medications, it tells you these things really are dangerous. Now, the example they use is the Tripedia vaccine. Tripedia is the name of it. It's, as the name implies, it's 3 vaccines in one. And the FDA, on their own website, unless they've yanked it, admits this vaccine leads to sudden infant death syndrome, anaphylactic reaction, cellulitis, autism, convulsion, grand mal convulsion, encephalopathy, that's that shrinking brain, hypotonia, neuropathy, somnolence, and apnea. The FDA's admitting this stuff is dangerous, but they know you'll never read those package inserts, and the doctors certainly aren't going to show them to you. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, we're talking about the medical industrial complex. We're talking about the suppression of the movie Vaxxed. We're talking about how the FDA's own website is acknowledging these vaccines are dangerous. They even mentioned sudden infant death syndrome. But when you're a parent and you go for the mandated vaccines and your kid drops dead, what do? Do they say, oh, it must have been an adverse vaccine reaction? No. They say, oh, you shook your baby. the baby died of shaken baby syndrome, and they'll put the parents who are already traumatized from losing their child into prison. That's how utterly ruthless this so-called health medical industry has become. Now, there's a story over in the Daily Mail, not getting a lot of coverage here in the United States of America. Down in Dallas, Texas, there is a hospice called Novus Healthcare Services. And the guy who runs it, Brad Harris, is now under investigation for ordering his staff to overdose the patients so that they would die quicker and the profits would go up. And he sent the salespeople who go on out to patients who are, dying, and look for the ones who are likely to die real quick and get them into the hospice to boost profits. And it may not be confined to just that one outfit. I want to share a personal story with you. When Claire and I first moved into our current residence, catty corner across from us was a very wonderful gentleman named Bruce. And he came down with cancer, and he fought it, and ultimately got transferred to a hospice. And we went out to visit him, and, he was already unconscious. They'd given him morphine. And Claire and I were on our way out, and I just made this casual comment to the nurse behind the station about how we'd check back in on Bruce on Sunday, and there was this look on her face that told me right then and there, Bruce will not be alive on Sunday. And sure enough, the next day, we got the call that he'd passed quietly in the night. And I understand these people are dying. They're there to die as comfortably as possible. But still and all, deliberately overdosing them so you can boost your profits, that tells you that this so-called healthcare system is all about a fast buck. Selling you expensive treatments, selling medications to perfectly healthy people that will then make them sick. And it's not just us civilians. Another article coming out of Patriot Rising. Veterans are being denied VA care at a higher rate than ever before. You would think after the scandals we've heard in recent years, they'd get their act together. But the VA's agenda seems to be to just shove these permanently disabled, injured people off to one side and hope they'll die to boost profits. And apparently the VA is looking at any excuse to deny care and treatment. If you don't have an absolutely honorable discharge with no negative marks on your medical record, or your military record, they're going to say, oh, your benefits are denied. You had a less than honorable discharge. You had a discharge because you were caught littering or something. That's a scandal. Now, even if you don't agree with the wars, and I certainly do not, we as a nation, we as the American people, we owe a debt of honor to all those young people who put on that uniform in the firm conviction that they were somehow serving the United States of America and the American people, and paid a heavy price for it. The fact that they were misled by the political leadership and used as mercenaries and looters and plunderers is irrelevant. They put on that uniform, they took the oath. They followed their orders. And those who came back from the war zone with injuries are owed care. And we have a government that's willing to give billions of dollars to Israel and can't spare the money to care for our own wounded people. And by the way, the VA is catching a lot of flack for arbitrarily declaring 250,000 returned veterans are not allowed to have firearms anymore. It was just a blanket assessment, not a case-by-case analysis. And I understand why they're trying to disarm the veterans, because if there is some kind of a civil clash in this country, those veterans represent an already trained military force which is not going to be on the side of the government. But for the VA to be just treating our returned veterans like that, that's something that you have to show to any young man, any young woman who's seriously considering enlisting. because they need to understand it's a raw deal. You're not going to be protecting the United States of America. You're not going to be bringing freedom to the rest of the world. You're going to be conquering other nations and bringing them into the American empire so that they can be looted and plundered. And if you are grievously injured, you are going to be on your own. You'll come back home in your wheelchair or on your crutches, hopelessly addicted to all these prescription antidepressants they're feeding you to make it easier for you to go on out and kill innocent people. And then you'll be abandoned because you're no longer of any use to the empire. Okay, let's get on to the subject of human-caused global warming. We are almost on the doorstep of April, and the United States is still getting snow. And I'm not talking about a little dusting. I'm talking about heavy snow. Now, the good news is a lot of the ski resorts in the Sierra have announced they're extending their skiing season into May. Mount Rose Ski Tahoe says that they're going to be open until May 8th. Monday's storm delivered 11 inches of snow at the North Star, California resort. That is heavy snow. Gosh darn, that human-caused global warming. Very interesting article in petosskinews.com. There's snow place like Michigan, and it's basically an anecdotal comment about how, oh, good, spring is here. I can start talking about planting in the backyard and everything, and then all of a sudden the snowstorm hit again. The Nevada Highway Patrol has been working crashes in the Reno-Sparks area caused by heavy snow. Residents in Bolton have been caught with a blanket of snow, causing problems on the M61. Surprise snowfall hits Lancashire in England. I got reader emails. It was snowing in Arizona. This is March 30th. Remember back in 2000 when all the global warming cult were saying snowfalls are now a thing of the past because you've warmed the planet. We're on the knee of the curve. Doom and destruction is coming. And we've had record-setting winter after record-setting winter after record-setting winter. How much longer are you going to sit there being lied to until you are angry enough to stand up and say, I am tired of the government and the establishment media lying to me? Whether it's about human-caused global warming, Saddam's nuclear weapons, Assad's sarin gas. Enough. The lies that we are told exonerate us from any obedience to the government. Remember, we're founded on the principle of consent of the governed. I don't consent to be lied to. Neither do you. And the legal system has established fraud negates consent. If you've given your consent in some kind of a contractual relationship and you discover fraud has occurred, you are off the hook. You are no longer obligated. And that is something you might want to be keeping in mind in the coming weeks and months. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and last segment of our program today. We're already seeing massive amounts of fraud, fakery, and deception in this election year. We know that up in Utah, where they had online voting, somebody set up fake online voting websites and sent out mass emails to direct voters to the phony sites so that their votes weren't counted. And you do need to be very, very careful about what's going on, because the government's doing nothing about the fraud and the crime. It's all working in their favor. So there's this article that came out over in Blacklisted News, Surviving on the Battlefield in the Information War. And I want to read you one paragraph from it. Words of wisdom. All protests, political movements, and armed struggles require immense amounts of resources to start, perpetuate, and most importantly, to succeed. They also require leadership. If one finds themselves reading reports of events that do not mention funding or the names of specific leaders, either those reporting on the events don't have those facts and should make note that such information is both missing and essential to find, or misdirection and disinformation is at play. There are a lot of liars out there. It's a big business, lying to the American people. It's called public relations. Slang, it's called spin doctoring. But that's really what it is, being paid to lie to the American people about the safety of vaccines, the necessity for war, human-caused global warming, what the candidates are up to. And we understand that there are individuals who think lying is okay. It's acceptable policy. It gets them what they want. What is very depressing, however, to me, is that there are too many Americans who are willing to take that money and go along with it. Now, there's an article that's posted to WhatReallyHappened.com about a former political operative who was finally couldn't stomach what he was being told to do, the frauds he was being told to commit, and he quit. But if you remember that whole Stanley Milgram experiment, too many people are willing to go along doing evil, bad things as long as some authority figure says it's okay. And I think that's a tremendous weakness in the human race. I mean, humans have built an amazing technological civilization in this world. We've gone to the moon, we've explored space, we've decoded the code of life itself, and yet somehow we cannot seem to free ourselves of this belief that we require somebody in authority to tell us how to live our lives, what food to eat, what medicine to take, how fast to drive. I think it's a serious flaw in humanity. Now, for the sake of human civilization, we suppress our instinct to kill. We suppress our instinct to steal. And I think maybe for the future of humanity, it's time to suppress our instinct to blindly obey authority. Because that's really what lies behind much of the evil that's taking place right now. So just something to think about. Now then, story coming out of Blacklisted News. Research is showing that TV is intellectually and socially dumbing down young children. And I am not too surprised at this result, because when you are out there reading, or you're playing, or you're doing a hobby, or you're interacting with other people, the key word there is interactive. There's a give and take. But with TV and also movies, it's a passive one-way experience. You sit there and material's fed at you, and you're not interacting with it. And so those portions of your brain that would be involved in the interaction process are not being exercised. Your brain is like any other part of your body. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes. Now, TV can be intellectually stimulating. Movies can be intellectually stimulating. But unfortunately, driven by profit, it's all about high adventure and fun and blood and gore and scantily clad people, because that's what sells the tickets, unfortunately. But I keep thinking in this modern age back on the words of Edward R. Murrow in this speech that he gave toward the end of his career. And he was talking about the birth of TV news. And this was after he'd had his run-in with Senator Joseph McCarthy and the military, which forced Senator McCarthy to sit in the back row of the Congress in shame for a month, and ultimately led to Murrow losing his job at CBS. But he was talking about TV and what he saw as its purpose within society. And he said, this instrument can teach. This instrument can enlighten. Indeed, it can inspire. But only to the degree that those humans who are using it intend to do so. I'm paraphrasing loosely. And you think about that, and you realize it applies to any other form of communication. Even could apply to printing. In Gutenberg's time, there's a lot of printed stuff that's complete utter nonsense. Pulp novels, romance novels, things like that. And it applies to computers and the internet. There's a lot of nonsense out there. What we need are more people who are willing to see the new media, not as just another quick get-rich-quick scheme, but as a tool to educate, inspire, and enlighten. We need more people like that. I was talking with my wife Claire earlier today about how we can't find stores around here to get electronic parts. I was waxing nostalgic about things I'd built as a kid when I was into electronics, and I built radios and all kinds of cool things, and you can't do that anymore. When I was a kid, Radio Shack was a place where you went and you got parts to build radios. CB, ham, shortwave, all kinds of stuff. And I think Radio Shack's biggest mistake, and the reason they're in trouble, is they abandoned that market and they just went mainstream selling the same consumer devices as everybody else, and that's why they're in trouble. And it's hard to find things to build things with in this nation. We've lost our love of building new things, of innovating, of creating. I mean, there's still a small population of people doing that. But when I was a kid, it was like everybody. It was, 50, 60% of my classmates were making things, whether it was for home ec or physics class or astronomy or photography or whatever. And today we seem to be a population of end users. And that's a tremendous loss because it means we've lost the initiative to lead the world into the future, at least in the technological sense. And I think we need to regain our love of making things, whether it's radios, cars, fine buildings. We need to regain that. We need to understand that what we are able to create with our own hands is the true measure of our worth, not just what we're able to buy and decorate ourselves with. Because that's the end of the consumerist society. That's the goal, the agenda, where your entire sense of self-worth is what you can buy and hang on your body and show off to your friends. And it's another indicator that the American culture has become decadent. Hopefully, when we're through this turmoil, we will regain our love of building new things, inventing new things. Now, final story here for today. This is from RINF.com. OSHA, after only 42 years, has finally gotten around to approving a rule protecting workers from silica. Now, silica is a material. It's used as a desiccant. It's very popular. That little tiny packet that you'll get in your products, that's silica. But it's also toxic, and the workers who work with it get sick, and they have been for 42 years. And only now has OSHA finally decided something needs to be done. All right, your tax dollars at work. There's the music. I got to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, on the Genesis Communication Network. And yes, the lovely Lady Claire will be with us on Friday. So we'll talk to you tomorrow, and aloha, America.